I am Monique Qualiey, and I would like to present to you the NAACP. The NAACP is by no means obscure, but tell me this, do you know who the founders are? Did you know that there was more than one founder? Well, let me tell you all about the legacy of the NAACP. So let's begin. This story begins in 1908, which marked the end of the Niagara movement. This group was the precursor to the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or as you know, the NAACP. Like its successor, the Niagara movement shared similar goals of striving for and upholding equality for African Americans. What caused the dissolution of this organization would be a two-day event known as the Springfield Race Riot of 1908. As most of you likely know, racism was woven into the very fabric of American culture in the early 1900s. Lynchings were commonplace, and Jim Crow had a chokehold on a citizen's way of life. Tensions between Caucasians and African Americans were palpable. Springfield, Illinois was no different. In 1908, two separate reports of black men allegedly assaulting white women occurred within days of each other. This stirred the hatred within the hearts of the white populace, and a violent mob was set on exacting the only revenge they knew: lynching. However, they were unable to achieve their goal because the accused men were relocated sometime prior. The mob soon targeted any home and business owned by or affiliated with African Americans. During the chaos, two innocent black men, Scott Burton and William Donegan, were lynched. Approximately 2,000 African Americans were forced to abandon their homes, and a total of 8 people were murdered, and thousands of dollars worth of property was destroyed. As it was, the Niagara movement was not capable of meaningfully responding to the tragedy. So, in 1908, the Niagara movement was no more. However, in its place rose the NAACP. The NAACP was an interracial organization which included the likes of W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, and Mary Church Terrell. After receiving most of the credit regarding the creation of NAACP, W.E.B. Du Bois' career as a sociologist revolved around studying the effects of racism on the African American community. As a black man himself, he had a unique perspective on how black people interact with their social environment that most sociologists of the time could not offer. He authored several influential essays, the most famous of being The Soul of Black Folk. Many of his ideas were in stark contrast to Booker T. Washington's, who advocated for a more passive approach to social change. When the NAACP first formed, Du Bois took an executive position within the group, but would later resign and become the lead editor for the NAACP's newspaper, The Crisis. Another important figure was Ida B. Wells. Unlike what a large majority of American society would have taught to a woman, Wells's parents taught her the value of an education. Due to yellow fever, Wells and her surviving younger siblings would be orphaned, necessitating a move to Memphis, Tennessee. There, a friend of hers would be lynched, sparking Wells to research and expose the reasoning behind lynching African Americans. Despite being driven out of Tennessee, Wells continued her activism in the realm of racial equality and women's suffrage, nationally and internationally. Similar to Wells, Mary Church Terrell was taught to value her education, and she was also personally impacted by lynching. In fact, Thomas Moss, one of 3 black men lynched on March 9, 1892, in Memphis, Tennessee, was friend of both Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell. Moss and his 2 business partners co-founded a successful grocery company that was so successful that the white competition felt sufficiently threatened to find any reason to lynch the 3 men. Terrell would collaborate with Wells, though her activism was more focused on empowering African American women. Besides the NAACP, Terrell was also credited with co-founding several other organizations, such as the National Association of Colored Women and the National Association of University Women. Back to the group as a whole. One of the NAACP's earliest and most notable achievements include causing a great decrease in lynchings. A report published in 1919 titled 30 Years of Lynching in the United States, 1889 to 1919, in combination with frequent attempts to raise public awareness, resulted in significant change in American culture. According to the Library of Congress, between the years 1914 to 1919, the average number of recorded lynchings was 47, with the record high being 76 in 1919. In comparison, between the years 1920 to 1925, the average number of recorded lynchings was an estimated 32, with the record high being 59 in 1921. Lynching was finally being acknowledged by the public as the vile, cruel act that it truly was. Furthermore, throughout its early years, the NAACP assisted African Americans through economic troubles through a variety of methods. As an African American, it was considerably more difficult to get a job, even more so during the Great Depression. The NAACP collaborated with white labor unions and President Theodore Roosevelt in order to provide some job opportunities for African Americans. With more than 2,000 branches worldwide, the NAACP is still thriving, even more than 100 years since its inception. In the current century, the NAACP continues to fight for justice for African Americans. The organization offers scholarships, readily available resources for anyone to educate themselves on current issues affecting the Black community, and plenty of programs for all African Americans to utilize, whether or not they are personally struggling. Thank you for joining me on this journey to educate yourself on a little piece of phenomenal African American history.